Hey everybody, this is the first of my games. There were 5 games in this tournament. This was the 2024 Sheridan, Wyoming Open. I did play this tournament last year and I got shared second place. I think that's the best I've ever done in an over the board tournament. I won $650 and yeah, shared second place. That tournament was kind of strange to me because, with the exception of one national master, which was the one game I lost, all my other games were against 1900s. This tournament featured a few more. I played 2 NMs in this tournament with 1 draw and 1 loss. So we will get to those games eventually, but this is my very first game of the tournament, and I played someone named Kaavya S. She was a little girl. I think she was somewhere around 11, 12 years old. And I didn't know what to expect. I had never played her before. I had no knowledge of her progression, so I just went into it assuming that she could possibly be very strong, and or she could be a prodigy of sorts, and she may be. I'm not 100% sure. But anyway, let's get into it. This is going to be a relatively short analysis. I'm not going to go too crazy with these. In the games versus the NMs, I will probably go a little bit more in depth, but I'm just going to give my thought process here and spend a little more time on what I consider to be critical moments during the game. So let's get into it. I was playing black. She had white. The time control was, what was it? I think it was 80 minutes with a 5-second delay. And as I eventually found out, this time control for me feels kind of quick, which is kind of strange because I play lots of bullet and blitz, but I got into time trouble in this game, and then I adapted in the next games, and I never got into time trouble again after this, but I had to start playing faster. So let's get into it. D4. Normally I'll play D5 here and go into sort of semi-Slav territory, but in this game I went for knight f6, knight f3, and I had this knight f3 move in one of my other games when I was playing white. I think in the game against Griffin McConnell, one of the NMs that I played, the only person that I lost to in this tournament. So we will get to that game eventually. G6, so I'm going into King's Indian territory here, which I have a fair amount of experience with. C4, and she's playing pretty much how I play as white. I play the D4, C4 setup all the time, and usually it's usually something like this. Sorry. How do we get rid of that circle? Okay, sorry about that. Anyway, C4. As white, I'm usually playing D4, C4, and the Queen's Gambit, declined or accepted. Usually they accept it. Bishop G7, Knight C3, castles. The King's Indian defense is just very easy to play. The moves are pretty logical for the most part, and you feel very protected as black with this defensive triangle. So as white, if you can get black to give up their strong dark squared bishop here, then you may be able to attack. Okay, Okay, to erase the arrows, you just repeat the same motion you did to start it. I gotta remember that. So castles, bishop f4. I'm not sure why that's marked as an inaccuracy. I'm gonna do this review without the engine running. I did review it with the engine running, but I like to also do it without the engine so we can sort of get more of a human approach to it. Bishop f4, so she's going to like, it's bishop f4 is a London line, so this is kind of like a London King's Indian, and if she plays g3 here, then it's like a Catalan mix also. Knight h5, just to challenge the bishop. If she moves back, then bishop f4 was in some sense a mistake. So you kind of need to play bishop g3 here to not move your bishop twice in the opening. She played bishop g3 and I just took it, giving myself the bishop pair. There is possibly some concern down the h-file, say if she castles kingside and maybe doubles up the rooks. That's not what ended up happening. She ended up castling kingside. d6, this is all pretty standard. e3 was interesting. I imagine if she played this, then it gives me moves like c5, possibly e5. And if it gets locked up, then f5 is a lot stronger. So she played the more safe move of e3. I played c6 here. I imagine c5 would have been also fine. What does engine say about c5? Yeah, c5 is also fine. I'm trying to remember why I played c6 instead of c5. Because c5, say we play c5, d5, e6, that's kind of like a Benoni structure, which would have been fine also. I don't remember exactly why I played c6. I think I was aiming for, well, of course you're blocking the knight from coming in, and I was aiming for something like c7, e5 with just a sort of balanced game. So she played bishop e2, knight b d7, rook c1. So the engine says black already has an advantage here, and I imagine that's just because black has the bishop pair. h6, sort of prophylactic move against knight g4 ideas, knight g5 ideas. b4, that was the computer move. Now I saw this, but the reason I didn't immediately play e5, because in these structures your main breaks as black are c5 and e5. And the reason I didn't do that was because d6 is immediately weakened, and I didn't see any reason to go for that right away. So instead I played c5 here, and I'm just trying to give scope to my dark squared bishop. And if she does start taking, then sometimes queen a5 can be threatening because she's not castled yet. So she's still playing safe. She played a3, just trying to preserve her pawn integrity. b6, so I'm just going to play b6, bishop b7, and play the game. I don't have any massive plans here at this moment. I'm just trying to get developed. And when you're playing a beginner, if you just play solid and wait, they'll make a mistake eventually. Queen b3, I didn't really think that was a great move. The queen is kind of off sides here, so unless there's like pushing all these pawns and getting an attack on the queen side, I feel like queen b3 is not that great of a move from a human perspective. e6 is a strange looking move, but this is also one of the computer top lines in this position. Just taking away the square from, taking away the d5 square from white. So she castles. My plan is just to play this in here and wait for the tension here in the center of the board to clarify, move on from there. Bishop b7, rook f2 d1. It was important here that if everything is traded, the knight will come to c5 and guard the bishop and attack the queen at the same time. Otherwise, this bishop here on b7 could be a liability. So queen e7. She's just going to double on the d file. And I saw at this point that when this knight comes to f6, I'm guarding against the main sort of scary rook intrusion, so her having the d file here I wasn't too concerned about. So knight f6, she takes with the d pawn, I take back, and if she takes here, I take back with the queen, of course, and c4 is going to be an isolated pawn and something for me to play against. So she doubles up. Rook c8 is just to get the bishop on the other side of this rook. So if the bishop is challenged at all, I can come here or here, and it's also bringing more tension here. I also saw at this point that if this pawn ever moves, then c4 is a fork, so that's a sort of tactical notion in the position. Knight b4, it's one of the more logical ways for white to progress. I thought that was a decent move. At this point so if the knight just takes here, then immediately we have bishop takes f3 and the knight falls, so she can't take a7 immediately. And the main thing I was looking at here was e5. I was looking at e5, knight d6, e4, and there's no rook to d7, and say white takes on b7, I can take here or here, and if white takes on c8, it will be the same thing. And even if, say, here, here, here takes, I can just take back, and this fork is still there. So in that case, it would be the exchange for two minors, which I thought was good for me. So if we look at this possible line, e5, and e5 is what I played. e5, I was looking at this line. And say she moves. I was looking at this. I evaluated this as good for me. There are a few other ways that variation can happen, but from what I saw, that looked good for me overall. So she didn't like any of that fork business, so she just retreated her rook. So I played bishop c6 just to guard this pawn, even though it's still technically not threatened, but it's also putting the question to this knight. So then she played knight in, which I did expect to happen, because again, if you're not making forward progress with your moves, then eventually, as white, if you're just shuffling your pieces, you're already admitting that you think your position's not great. So she played one of the only logical ways in. There's no a4 because this pawn hangs, and there's not really good forward movements for any of these pieces. So knight d6 was kind of necessary in a sense. So she's hitting my rook on c8. I just played rook b8, skewering the queen in case she takes. So she closes the position with b5. I spent a fair amount of time here considering the move bishop a8, and I eventually opted against that simply because my bishop is sort of very limited in scope on a8, and say this eventually happened and she bolsters e4 enough, then I could see that my bishop is just biting on granite for the rest of the game. And this is kind of interesting moment of the game because the move that I picked by the computer was a mistake. The computer marks me as having one mistake and one blunder. The blunder came at the end of the game when we were both in mutual time trouble. We both had like a minute or two on the clock, and it was before move 40. So a minute on the clock with 5-second delay, you can't think about your moves too terribly much. So I instead went for bishop d7. This was a mistake by the computer. I'm not sure 100% why, but this is marked as a mistake. And then she played e4 here. When she played e4, I immediately saw that she had like locked her knight in this spot on the board, and it's pretty well guarded by the rooks, but I saw at this point, if I just move my bishop and then double my rooks, at some point she can't guard this knight with the queen unless she goes here. So if the rooks are doubled and the queen is the third defender of the knight along the d file, then I could just take the knight and essentially win the queen for 2 rooks, which should be good for me. She did find a resource in the position that sort of brought on the blunder that I made. So I played bishop g4, planning on just taking, getting her bishop here and sort of having it bad with relation to her light squared pawns. Or if she takes with the pawn, her bishop is still sort of bad. Knight h2 was her response, which, as you can see from here, even if I turn this off, it still shows the evaluation, even if it's not showing moves. That was a mistake by her, and I just traded the bishops and went with my plan of doubling rooks on the d file. So she went back to the d file with her rooks. Now f4 is the way to muddy the waters here, as you'll see. There was a correct way for me to handle this, and I went in the other direction, which wasn't, the blunder wasn't a losing blunder, but it was a blunder that if she had seen it, she didn't see it because she was in time trouble and she was probably a little bit nervous playing someone almost 400 points higher than her. So I doubled my rooks. She took, queen takes, knight f3. I saw this. This was the crucial moment. This was where the blunder occurred. Like I said, we were both in mutual time trouble here. Something like a minute or two each on the clock. If I had seen here, because this is defended by the knight, so there's not really a threat on h2. And if she had played knight e4, then there's a threat on my rook on d7, and there's also a threat on my queen, which is on g3 in that line. I didn't see that when I played queen takes g3, probably because of time trouble. Once I played it, I did see, oh, there's e5, knight g4, knight e4. and I saw this threat, and I saw this threat, and I was like, well, I can just play queen f4. She takes on d7, and then I take the knight on e4. So I did see that, and I saw that it wasn't just the win of a piece, it was the win of an exchange. And if we go into that line, so she did play this move. I did play knight g4. The correct move here again is knight e4. If she had played knight e4, then yeah, queen f4, she takes, I take, she takes, I take on e4. And white is up the exchange, but white is probably going to lose e5. If we go through a few engine moves here. So the engine is just basically proposing a draw by repetition. Not sure how that would have gone if we had gone into that line with mutual time trouble and me being the stronger player by rating. I probably would have been okay, I would imagine, but also if you're the exchange down, that can also make you nervous, and it's easy to make mistakes if you're not used to playing that type of imbalance. So she did not find knight e4. Instead, she played knight takes f7, which is just a big blunder. Of course, if I take with the king here, then she wins my rook and is winning the game. For instance, if we go like this. So of course, I did not take the knight. I just took here on d2, and at this point, I think she was getting flustered and nervous, and it's losing regardless, but she didn't notice this threat, so she took my rook on d8 and got checkmated on g2. After the game was over, I eventually told her, like, oh, knight e4, I think you would have been okay. And then she thought about it. She was like, oh yeah, she seemed a little sad about that, but if she had found it, the game would have gone on. Who knows what would have happened after that. But anyway, that's the game. Overall, I was happy with how I played. The mistake in the position with bishop to d7, in my eyes, that's not necessarily a mistake. As per human play, there were rational reasons for me not playing bishop a8. The blunder is sort of excusable in mutual time pressure, and her knight was trapped here, so if I had played correctly here, as per the engine, and played queen e7 after knight f3, still the move is this, I believe, yeah, and still knight g4, and it's -3, e5 is going to fall. And I would just be a pawn up. This doesn't look that crazy of an advantage for black. It's 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, it's 2 pawns. It is 2 pawns up. And no, it's 1 pawn. It's 5 pawns versus 6. And her pawns are doubled here on the king side, so I guess that makes sense that it's a -3. Knight g4. So yeah, if I had played queen e7, then it would have been it would have been an advantage, whereas the way that I went if she had found knight e4 was equal as per the computer. But even that wouldn't have been the end of the world. I have a feeling if that had happened, then I might have been able to still get her to make a mistake just because of the rating disparity. But I don't know. Anyway, that's the game. So after game 1 of the tournament, then I'm 1-0. I've gotten past the possibility of losing to a 1600 rated little girl, which if that had happened, then I would not be too terribly happy going into game 2. But I did win this game, and game 2 was against, I think it was against Griffin. Let's see. Game 2. Yep, game 2 is against Griffin. He had black, I had white. So that will be the next one that I get into. I'm not sure exactly how fast I'm going to upload these games, but my goal is to get all 5 uploaded at some point. So thank you for participating in this examination of my tournament results, and I'll see you with the next one, okay? If I can figure out how to quick time. Game 1. So yeah, thanks again. That's all for today.